Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Nassiri, and my goal is to help members of the armed forces and the veteran community navigate their civilian career. Today's episode number 182 with Killjan Anderson.
So I actually eclipsed 20 years in service at the Air Force Academy and really viewed my separation or retirement as a process and not an event. That would be my advice to folks that are still in uniform on active duty and reserves, is that you really have to start thinking about, like, what do things look like after I get out? Broader than, I need a job or I need somewhere to live. What do you want to be doing? So we really kind of took part in some analysis on the city we wanted to live in, the type of work we wanted to do, and let that kind of drive the conversation.
Well, first of all, many of you are listening to this by audio. Today's episode is available in video if you prefer to see me and Killjan, aka Kill Anderson, with that visual reference. You're welcome to check that out on either YouTube, our YouTube channel, or in the show notes. Let me start by reading a bio on Kill. I didn't do this during our interview. I wanted to make sure we had every minute to get Killjan's advice because he has so much to share and so much experience. So here is his quick background. Killjan Anderson, or Kill Anderson, is the executive director at the Pat Tillman Foundation, an organization that unites and empowers remarkable military veterans and spouses as the next generation of public and private sector leaders committed to service beyond self. He started his career in the United States Air Force, where he served over 21 years, retiring as a Command Chief Master Sergeant. He holds an MBA from the Notre Mendoza College of Business and a Bachelor of Science in Management from the University of Maryland University College. I really enjoyed my conversation with Kill. I'll give you a lot more context about how I know Kill, all the great things that led to me meeting him. But I think this is a great interview, not only to learn about the Pat Tillman Foundation, which is an exceptional organization, but also because of Kill's own story of 20 years of military service, followed by public service. Stay tuned. I want to get right into this interview, but stay tuned after the episode. I'll stick around and go through kind of a debrief of what some of the things that stood out to me during the interview. Maybe that will help this sink in more. As always, at beyondtheuniform.io, you'll find other episodes to help you in your journey, other resources to help you as well. Check out our new coaching plan. It's highlighted in the navigation menu, and please spread the word if you're enjoying the show. So let's dive into my conversation with Kill. So joining me today in Chicago is Killjan Anderson. Kill, welcome to Beyond the Uniform.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me, Justin.
So for listeners, I gave the bio in the intro, but I just wanted to add a little bit of personal seasoning. So first of all, I was introduced to Kill by, and Kill, you got to help me out here. I keep on mispronouncing. How do you say Tim's last name? Is it she? Is it C? Or...
So it's Shaw, actually.
Shaw, okay.
Somehow we land on Shaw from HSIA, but yeah, Tim's a great guy.
I've probably said his name like 40 times on the podcast, and every time it's different. So Tim Shaw introduced us from Service to School. Tim, I greatly respect. Many of you who've listened to the show, I've pumped Service to School on many episodes. Tim introduced Kill with the quote, "He's one of the smartest and thoughtful veterans in the entire veteran landscape, government, for-profit, and non-for-profit," which, coming from Tim, is an exceptional statement. And then the added thing was Kill and I were both in San Francisco 2 weekends ago for the Service to School Summit. I flew in from Denver for it. I got there before the panel that Kill and I were on 2 different panels together, but I showed up midway through a panel that Kill was on, recognized him from his LinkedIn profile, and I was in the back of the room. And Kill, I don't even think you know this, but I was like in the back. I was actually taking notes. There were so many things you were saying that I added in that I want to, if we have time, get to. And then the panel that Kill and I were on, the first one, I just feel like you had the best quote of the entire weekend for me. And I'm sure we'll get into this, but it was this analogy around the grass and the pavement and just kind of how life goes in different directions. And so I'm very excited to go in a lot of different ways. But maybe just to start, right before we started recording, you were talking about your transition from the Air Force. And you spent over 21 years in the Air Force. And I just love what you were saying about how to approach retirement. And so I'd love to just kind of hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. Again, Justin, thanks for having me. This is great. You mentioned Tim. I've got to take a second just to talk about a remarkable guy. Tim is. He's actually one of our Tillman Scholars, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about here in a moment. But yeah. Yeah. I was stationed at the Air Force Academy in 2011. I was about 2 years out from being retirement eligible. So I actually eclipsed 20 years in service at the Air Force Academy, and really viewed my separation or retirement as an event and not a, I mean, excuse me, let me back up, as a process and not an event. That would be my advice to folks that are still in uniform on active duty and reserves, is that you really have to start thinking about, like, what do things look like after I get out? Broader than, I need a job or I need somewhere to live. What do you want to be doing? So we really kind of took part in some analysis on city we wanted to live in, the type of work we wanted to do, and let that kind of drive the conversation. But it really does take an extensive amount of planning in advance versus kind of 3 days landing on what you want to go do and then just blindly applying for jobs and hoping something pans out.
I love that whole process thought, and any just kind of random tips around. I love that thought of actually analysis of the city and the type of work. Was there anything that helped you get a sense for where to live, or maybe a process you used to figure out like what type of work you wanted to go into?
Yeah, so like for me, it sounds more like a methodology now, right?
Yeah.
It was a little more winging it when we were in the process of it. That's why I'm kind of trying to reach back to those in uniform to say, here's what you need to be thinking about. But I think I did this, or my family did this almost kind of accidentally, but it was helpful to us. I was, a security forces kind of military policeman in the Air Force. So the greater part of my career was spent kind of on shift as a patrolman, dispatcher, and then I moved into the senior enlisted ranks, more of a manager, supervisor, and eventually a senior enlisted advisor. But around my 16-year mark, I had the opportunity, I got exposed to the Tillman Foundation mission when I was stationed in Luke Air Force Base in Arizona. And being around the mission really just kind of turned everything on its head for me. I wasn't necessarily looking and think about what I wanted to do, but I got exposed to this mission and was like, wow, that is like really interesting work. I liked the field that was in education and helping veterans reach their full potential. So I would say I kind of accidentally stumbled upon something that was interesting to me. So the reason I kind of connected back to making retirement a process is if you can engage in that deliberate behavior and being exposed to things that are happening off of the installation, figure out what it is that's maybe interesting to you or what's not, right? Maybe you spend some time figuring out what you don't want to do. But you need to begin that homework early on and then start positioning yourself towards it.
Yep. I love that. I mean, prior to being exposed to the Tillman Foundation, and I know this is like a long ways before you were getting out, did you have a thought of what you would do? Was there some other path you were thinking of going down?
I was, my background was law enforcement. And so I really just kind of thought I'd wind up doing, applying to ATF or maybe the FBI and doing something sexy like that. And it was, I hadn't really spent much time thinking about it. And I think that's the root of some of the problem. You're so busy doing your job, active duty, or, and you have to kind of stop and look up. So, again, making that a process is the people that I know that are still serving, I reach back to and go, hey man, where are you going? Like, what's your degree and what's the type of work you're thinking about? And they either have like a very fixed idea on something they want to go do, or they haven't thought about it at all. And I think you have to kind of position yourself for any number of things that are interesting to you. But the big challenge I think a lot of veterans face is that they get out and they're unfulfilled, or they've lost that kind of teamwork camaraderie aspect of the job that we all love so much about it. So, thinking about how you want to feel when you're at work, the type of work you want to be doing are all questions you need to be asking yourself and scanning the environment on. City, right? I mean, I think veterans think about, I can't speak for all veterans, but I can tell you, my immediate thought went to my family, what city I'd live in, how much we'd be making from just kind of a managing your household standpoint, and spent very little time thinking about what do I want to be doing? Really, what would be passionate? What am I passionate about? So the sooner you can kind of figure that out, then I think you can really start making some progress towards that as an eventual goal and serve effectively at the same time.
I love a lot of what you're saying, and I love the phrase you used. I wrote it down, to stop and look up. And, I take my friends that I know from the military and I abstract from that. That's, maybe representative of what's in the military. So I may be off on this, but I feel like there's a subset of my friends who are still in the military. And these people, they're bought in. They are good. I think anyone serving in the military is a good human being, but like these people are so centered on serving country, serving their command, putting everything first, and in many ways making so many sacrifices. And so I just want to like chime into what you said of, for those of you out there that may identify with that, you have an obligation to yourself, to your family, to the veteran community to take that time to step back, look up, and figure out what you want after the military. And I think it's so noble and so, probably easy and alluring to just go gung-ho on your military career and really knock that out of the park. And I commend you for that. But please don't shortchange yourself. Like, take the time that you need to take your head up and start doing this research. Maybe it's on the weekends, maybe it's on weeknights, but give yourself that time to start asking those questions about where you want to live, what you want to do. And what I love about your story, Kill, is that, 6 years out, you had that initial exposure, and it's like, you don't want to rush into marriage after the first date. You had 6 years of, it's not like I don't imagine you're interacting with them every single day or every single week, but 6 years of random interactions and letting it sink in and really getting up the sense of this is what I want to do, rather than I'm at a weekend event, I met this person, I'm going to sign on the dotted line. I think they may not lead to the outcome a lot of people are looking for.
Yeah. I mean, so I think one of the challenges is there's kind of this, and the military listeners will probably recognize this term, but they call it ROAD, and it's retired on active duty. And so what you wind up having is there's examples of people who don't finish strong, right? Is that they're in the military, they know they're getting out, they're kind of engaged in this lukewarm service, and they're like focused too much on what's next, right? And so I think there's this fear of not finishing strong. I mean, you have a job, you have a responsibility. If you've been in, whether it's towards the end of a 4 or 6 year, tour in an early enlistment or 20, 21 years, you feel, and one of the things that's fantastic about the military is the heavy commitment that you have to your subordinates and to your command. So I think part of the challenge is kind of the construct itself, is that you're busy, you've got a lot of things to do. But an effective leader will also realize that you're at a life junction, but it's kind of tricky, right? You don't want to necessarily tip your hand too much, because you've got a career and you want to be promoted and you have other jobs that you want to get. So there's a bit of a balancing act there. All I'm suggesting, kind of to your point, is you have to be aware that it's out there. You are going to separate, retire at some point, and it pays to think about what that looks like while you're still serving.
That's great. And let's maybe talk about, to set the stage, the Pat Tillman Foundation. I would say, as an outsider, it is one of the, if not the preeminent veteran organizations. It has an incredible reputation. Pat Tillman himself has a reputation, and that legacy has been carried forward with the foundation. For listeners, what should they know about the Pat Tillman Foundation?
Yeah, boy, we could take a couple hours on that one. So I'll try and be as brief as possible. But obviously people are familiar with Pat's story. He left a very lucrative career playing for the Arizona Cardinals and joined the NFL. But there's a lot about Pat that people don't know. John Krakauer wrote a great book on him called Where Men Win Glory. If you haven't had it, it's an excellent read. Justin, I'll make sure I get you a copy if you haven't seen it. And
I just, for listeners, I did that one on audiobook. There's a link in the show notes where you can get a free audio book through Beyond the Uniform. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. It was half of it I listened to running, and I think that I can look back on my run. My pace was probably faster. It was so inspirational. It's so well told. John Krakauer is incredible, but the source material is so rich, and so just plus wanting to read that book. Yep. Glory.
Yep. And so the thing is a lot of people don't realize Pat graduated from Arizona State University in 3 years with a 3.84 GPA. He's an exceptional student. He loved to debate. He spent his time spending time and energy about what other people knew, not what he knew. When he'd introduced himself, they'd ask, "What do you do?" And he'd say, I work in Arizona. And he wasn't enamored by playing in the National Football League. So there are a lot of things about Pat that people don't know in general, beyond kind of the leaving the football part, which is really what the foundation is based on. So our core values are humble leadership, scholarship, service, and impact. And so the way Pat lived his life is kind of how the foundation was born. So interestingly, when he fell in battle in 2004, believe it, that long ago, 2004, people started mailing in checks to Arizona State University, to the Cardinals. There was no foundation, so we were kind of born backwards. Initially, in the first few years, it was kind of an Arizona State University facing body, but in 2008, we launched the Tillman Scholars program, which you just brought up. So every year we convene a scholarship. This past year, 2,300 people applied, wow. and we landed on 60 military veterans and spouses. So the first thing I say is it's a highly competitive scholarship. But the gates to hit in your scholarship application are essentially what compelling event or series of events occurred to you in your personal life, in your military service, that kind of helped you focus on what's really important to you. And have you been accepted to a university to engage in a course of studies around that kind of impact to you? And most importantly, what are you trying to do? So we're really after that ripple effect of of investing in highly successful, high ceiling, proven track record military veterans and spouses that most importantly are connected to passion. And that's what Pat was all about. And our bet is that if you bring this community together of impactful people that are passion driven, like Tim Shaw, right? Like some of the other people you've met that are Tillman Scholars, you bring that community together, there's a lot of synergy there. So at the end of the day, we're community builders. So day to day for the layman, it's a fellowship. But there's really kind of these three tenets of scholarship, this network of bringing them together, and this continued professional development for them. But we've already seen, and we're on our 10th class this year, there's a NASA astronaut. There's been a company funded by Shark Tank. There's others that are doing remarkable work in underserved communities, chasing cures for Ebola in Western Africa, you name it. So it's really about human potential and service beyond yourself.
And is that, this is like a silly question, but for the scholarship, is that is someone who's going to school and then they apply concurrently to be a Tillman Scholar, and I'm assuming that the foundation then helps offset some of the cost of their undergrad or graduate school work?
Exactly right. So we actually have Tillman Scholars that are still serving on active duty, but you have to be accepted to an institution. At this point, we have Tillman Scholars that have attended over 108 institutions nationwide. So a lot of people think it's like an Arizona State thing. It's not. We have scholars literally coast to coast in literally every field of human endeavor.
That's great. And what about, we talked about what led you there, but let's maybe just talk about, I'm just owning, I feel torn between, we could spend 3 episodes on the Tillman Foundation, and I feel like we could spend 3 episodes on your experience and background. So I'm just kind of internally debating here because there's so much here. Let's maybe start with your role as executive director. And I want to highlight this because you spent a career of military service, and now you've moved on to a career of public service in nonprofit. And so how would you explain to someone on active duty, like what is an executive director? What does an executive director do?
Sure. It's a really good question. And it kind of, it makes me think back to, when you're in the military, it's really hard to get a sense of like what these jobs day to day are after you leave this like really rigid kind of structure, if you will. So, first worth noting is when I first came to the foundation, I was in an operations role, and then I moved up to executive director about a year ago. So I will first start with, if I can, kind of the chief operations role I had. Marie Tillman is Pat's widow. She was the president of the foundation at the time, full-time staff member. And I really kind of moved into a position in direct support of her managing the day-to-day of the staff. So it was very comparable to being, a senior non-commissioned officer based on my experience in the military. You had a commander-facing responsibility. In this case, it was Marie. And then there's kind of a staffing responsibility of managing, direct reports, and and they have subordinates underneath them. So, Marie and I used to laugh and be like, how do I describe my role here? And it's like, oh, Marie, I'm like your first sergeant, is that, you tell me what it looks like, and then I go and make sure it gets done with it, kind of the strategy to task piece. Moving to executive director last spring, so Marie moved to go chair the board and name me executive director, which was like it'll be one of my just most celebrated personal accomplishments in being able to work with this team and being entrusted with the opportunity to serve in this capacity is more of a strategic role because, a lot of people don't know, but the foundation is really pretty small, 12 staff members.
Wow.
With this big nationwide footprint, NFL Salute to Service partners, handing out SB awards. You've got this fellowship with over 520 scholars. That's all administered, and this large run, Pat's run, right, in Arizona, 35,000 person event. All that is executed with the 12-member staff. So, before we go any further, I got to tell you, the staff is remarkable, and they do just incredible work year round. So it's not exactly the most difficult management assignment I've had, if you will. They're really a lot of self-starters. But more than anything, it's really turned into project management. To answer your question, it's almost like project management. There are a lot of moving pieces. Just like in the military, you've got a lot of capable men and women that are out there to take care of those tasks. So it's about delegating, which is hard for me, but it's delegating. It's supervising and following up and then reporting up. So there's nothing cosmic going on the civilian side that isn't happening in the military, but you just don't get a sense of that on active duty, right? And so one of the things I'm most grateful to the foundation for is when I was hired, was hiring me knowing that I had some blind spots, right? And how organizations operate on the civilian side. But it's interesting because after we did I started in the fall of 14, and we had our annual audit. We do a very aggressive audit. We bring in an auditor, and they look at all the foundation processes. And I went through the audit, and Marie kind of held my hand and walked me through what was expected. And I was like, oh, this is just like a military inspection. It literally is the same thing. So I think one of the challenges is for military members is to get in contact with people on the outside of the military, figure out what kind of the parallels are, and it will reduce some of the anxiety. Because once I did one, I was like, piece of cake, right? There's a lot of work that goes into it, but it was nothing that was foreign to me. So kind of going back to your point, executive director is a lot like leadership in the military. You got people you're responsible for. You got to take care of them. You got to cultivate, talent. You got to develop talent. You got to take care of them. You got to hold them accountable. And then you have a boss that you report to. So it's very similar.
I love that phrase. You said, hiring knowing blind spots. You had blind spots. I love the self-awareness of okay, there's things I don't know here, and I'm going to learn. One of the things I realized when you were saying that, though, too, is I'm always thinking of this from the context of how does a veteran or how does someone in the military explain to a hiring manager or someone at a networking event what they do. So it's I feel like my focus in a lot of these interviews is how do you translate what you did on active duty to that civilian force? You kind of just flipped that for me, where it's how does the person, the veteran, translate the work that they're doing and realize how it relates to what they did before? And I can imagine, even in my own experience, how that gives you more confidence, where you're okay, great, I get it. This evaluation translates to the inspections I've done. There's 15% that's different, 85% is the same, and I could see that applying to so many different things. Okay, I need to train a department of product managers. Well, okay, great, I trained a whole ship of people, so these are the things that it's different. These are maybe the blind spots, but the bulk of it is very similar, and I love that because it acknowledges that decent chunk that is new, where it takes learning and mentorship and openness to learning, but it also has that foundation of confidence of I've got this, I've done this before.
Sure. And this problem is not unique to the military, right? There's people that transfer from one vocation to another, and they've got to make some adjustments. So, being kind of in this space now where, it's interesting being at the Tillman Foundation and not on active duty, but around veterans a lot. It's good because it still kind of scratches my itch to be in the military or to be around the military. So I still have a really good touch there. But, I've dealt with, I deal with a lot of companies, partners, sponsors of the foundation that actually are on the lookout to hire veterans. And we're not in the business of hiring. It's kind of, I'm sure it's a second or third order effect of some of our partnerships with companies, but the companies that I've seen do that well acknowledge that there are blind spots, but that there's talent there. Right. And that's why I'm particularly grateful to Marie, and I would applaud companies out there. You can't just have a hiring initiative, right? We're going to hire 8 zillion veterans, right? Okay. Right. You still have to vet the veterans. There's some good ones. There's some bad ones. But you get in, and there's got to be some degree of tolerance for the organization just to say, okay, let me get this guy or gal situated here. That's certainly what the foundation did with me. And so you kind of will come in, you ask a zillion questions. But there's, for some companies, I think there's this misperception that veterans are going to come in and make your staff do push-ups, right? Or they're just going to bark and yell and cuss, and it's going to be like, Full Metal Jacket. Well, the fact is, to be an effective military leader, you have to have a lot of soft skills as well. You've got troops that have family challenges. You're talking to spouses. You're talking to family members. You're dealing with delicate issues. So one of the misnomers about veteran transitioning is they're this rough and tough and abrasive group, and they just aren't, right? There's a huge distance. So the companies that understand that, I think, have fared well in this area. They build an on-ramp. They bring the veteran on. They work with him or her to get kind of situated. So it kind of takes this self-awareness, I think, from the veteran side to like ask questions, not rest on your laurels, be somewhat aware of hopefully your blind spots, and then work with them to be. But I think it's kind of in a lot of ways, it's kind of a non-event. if you really can play, I mean, it's a significant event, don't get me wrong, but if you're ready for it and you're thinking about it and you find a place that is welcoming to veterans and willing to help you get on board, it can really be a great transition. At least it was in my case. I know that's not always going on, but to the extent that the veteran and the company kind of have this understanding of what they're about to enter into together, it can be a really, really special opportunity.
What about, just to take it one step further, I know from our audience the favorite question for many people who have written in is getting a sense of the granular detail of your day-to-day life. And I know that every day is different, but if you were to maybe take either a representative day or maybe just a random day, could you kind of time stamp it to give people a sense? Sure. I know it helps them to know what time you start, what sort of activities, what time you end, what the weekends look like. So just getting a little bit more in the weeds on it.
Sure. Okay. So, so the day, really the hours are 9 to 5, right? Like you hear on TV, they are truly 9 to 5. In the beginning, it was wild because I was like waking up at like 5 and 5:30. I was used to going to PT. And obviously you need to keep many of those routines still alive. So, but the time you aim for is 9 a.m. to start. Our organization obviously has various employees at different life positions. We have some people that work remote. We have 3 staffers that are in Arizona State. So there's kind of people spread all throughout the area. And at the foundation, we have 4 main departments. So there's development, fundraising, programs, which is kind of the core mission, brand and communications, and operations. And so, when I show up at 9 a.m., I've got essentially those directors are all present. We don't have an everyday meeting, but it's kind of a quick situation check to see what everybody's got going on. We oftentimes have people on the road. So really the first part of the morning is just kind of getting oriented. It's always nice. We all sit and we're in a shared workspace in downtown Chicago. So it's always nice to just kind of put eyes on everybody. But to kind of my earlier point is everyone's pretty self-sufficient, right? So my day to day, there's always kind of this little inbox piece like we all have. You kind of see what's in front of you and knock those things down. But at the foundation, at different seasons, different departments are in the lead. So we just came out of Patch Run, which was a 35,000 person event in Arizona. We went simultaneously, we're doing our selection process. So last week the week before last, we were doing congratulations calls to the new class. And so most of our efforts right now are in the brand and communications realm, getting bios together, getting ready to announce the class and do press releases. So really right now our programs and our brand are kind of driving the efforts. So again, very similar to the military is spend a lot of my time trying to get out of the way for really capable folks that are leading those efforts, making sure that barriers are removed for them. So it might be in meetings and finding out what's going on, what type of obstacles they're encountering, obviously encouraging, strong efforts and things that are going well, and just making sure that we're making progress. And I would really describe it as very, very similar to being, in a military unit of capable people that are working for you. Is make sure they have all the resources they need. So, like in the military, lots of meetings, lots of calls, but it's essentially trying to clear a path for capable people to take care of the task before them. So I don't know if I answered that, man.
No, that's great. That's great. And I like the, I can imagine it's appealing to have that consistency of schedule. I know some of the other careers that I've interviewed, I think like the opposite extreme is some of the investment bankers that I've interviewed, where not only are the hours insane, but it's also it can be a very unpredictable schedule where you're going to dinner at 7 o'clock with your wife, and then your boss dumps a bunch of work on you, and you're there till 3 a.m. So I imagine that's one of the appeals is that consistency of schedule and kind of consistency of that schedule.
Well, yeah, and I mean, don't get me wrong, right? Like, it's not like we're just kind of sitting around and goofing off. I mean, there's plenty of things to do. Um, some departments. So when you think about like our development team, our fundraisers, myself, I do a lot of our external partnerships. There's evening events that you wind up going to. But one of the things that I enjoy the most about being out of the military now is just not these rigid lines. The military is 7:30 to 4:30 on paper, and if it took longer, you stayed longer. That's still in effect at the foundation. If you've got stuff to do, people will stay. But I would say typically you have much more predictability and stability around your schedule. First of all, subtract the deployments, right? I mean, that off the bat. But then notionally, it's not like, oh, it's 12, everybody go to lunch. You have a lot more freedom and flexibility. We have some employees that have young children. So look, get up, have breakfast with your kids, take them to school. And if your day starts at 9:30 or 10, then it starts at 9:30 or 10. And at the end of the day, we're going to squeeze the work out of you. There's certainly times that there's surges, and you have to work a little long. There's other times when we're able to take a knee, and we do so. But that's one of the things we're very proud about at the foundation is, our senior team works very closely together to hopefully, what we feel like is take care of people. We want people to have, we have a very holistic view to people and employees at the foundation. And very similar to how I work with some commanders is you think about their education. Are they going to school? Are they involved in life enriching activities? Are they spending time with their spouse? Well, in the civilian world, same deal, but I would just argue you have a little bit more flexibility. So someone's mom flies into town partway through the day. Hey, just stay on the grid, check your email, go pick up your mom, spend some time with your family. So there's some fantastic things on the civilian side. It's very difficult from a structure standpoint for the military to mimic. You just can't. There's too many people and kind of the circumstances around service. But out here, at least in my experience, you have a great amount of flexibility. The focus is make sure you get your job done, and it really earns you some flexibility to have a really full life beyond. We want people having a great life just beyond their day-to-day work.
That's great. I'm of the field of the camp of belief that happy cows produce good milk, and if you treat your team and your employees and the company well, and they have those rich lives, that leads to better output. And I know there's different fields of view. I think the opposite extreme is the grind your team to the bone. What I perceive from reading the Steve Jobs biography is kind of the Apple culture of kind of like ride people and push them and just, and obviously that can lead to great achievement. But I really admire organizations that treat, like you said, treat the team holistically and realize that we all have life going on and that you need to have the flexibility to deal with that.
Can I add something just real quick?
Yeah.
Kind of going back to blind spots. I remember, first getting on board, right? And like, I'm thinking, I'm up early and 9, I'm cruising in the office and, it is not Sleepy Hollow. I want to make sure that's very clear, right? But I'm used to like this really defined structure, right? Like super busy day extending into the evening. And so it was just kind of interesting, just kind of the jolt of just the flexibility and schedule off the bat. And then one of the other things that I learned, and we have a really aggressive 360 degree kind of eval process here, is I wasn't saying thank you a lot, right? Even, 3 years down the road, people would kind of knock something out of the park. And I think sometimes in the military, it's kind of like job, right? Like, oh, that's your job. And so I've gotten some really valuable feedback from people that are willing to give feedback and go, look, like, that was hard. We were working really hard and I'm going to give so-and-so the day off. And I was like, cool. But I've gotten feedback that, you come from the military sometimes, you're just kind of making more widgets, right? And you're working harder, you're deploying, you're pushing the team very, very hard. I think there have been times that, I haven't been very aware in that case. And so, that's where I think transitioning, you have to really be willing to be vulnerable and hopefully, and seek that feedback because there's things that you do unknowingly that impact the team. So I'm not declaring victory at all in terms of being a leader at the foundation. But, it's an ongoing process and there's kind of some old habits are hard to shake. But, again, you grow and develop, but there's lots of learning on the outside once you get out.
That's great. So one of the things, and for listeners, the episode that would be published previous to this is the panel that Kill and I were on about MBA. And so if you're interested or considering pursuing an MBA, listen to that episode. But I wanted to touch on it briefly here. One, actually, there's kind of three things I would love to have you speak about. So first of all, 21 and a half years in the Air Force, executive director of the major foundation. How important is an MBA to that success? Two, you had talked about financing an MBA, and you had talked about transferring your GI Bill to kids, which I didn't know you could do, which I would love to have you talk about. And then the last thing is, and it's just a quote that I'd written down from when you were speaking on a previous panel, the sense that I got was, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you talked about as an 18-year-old, you're on academic probation, and you had this, maybe I perceived you had this image of yourself as that's who you were when it came to education. And one of the things that drove you to do an MBA was facing that fear, which when I heard it, I wrote that down because I thought that was so incredible. And so I know I kind of threw out a lot, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on the MBA, about financing it, and then kind of facing those fears.
Sure. No, thanks for bringing that up. So, yeah, when I retired in 2014, I had made some progress on a project management kind of certificate. I was a few classes from an MBA from kind of an online school that certainly kind of targets military veterans, that is able to offer a course load. I mean, I literally took classes in deployed settings, and I got out. So I had a 4-year degree, and some worked towards a graduate degree, and then was in the operations role. And one of the things I found is, through my role at the foundation, I was connecting at a very high level with organizations outside, sponsors, Fortune 500 companies, and people paid attention to like where you went to school. It was a conversation point. I think kind of the joke I made in the panel was that people were saying, well, when I got done at Tuck, or I got done at, Booth, and they were kind of like spitting out these school names, and I literally didn't know what they were. I was going home and Googling them and going, oh, she went to Penn, or he went to Dartmouth. So I started kind of realizing it was something that mattered. And one of the, I love the military, but one of the mistakes I think we make on the enlisted development side is a lot of attention is paid to the academic milestone, but not necessarily the caliber of the degree. And I don't want to sound like a degree snob here, right? I want to be very careful, but it can serve you very well, right? I had my 4-year degree in the military, and where it was didn't matter. It's the fact that I had my 4-year degree. So when I get out and I'm meeting people that attend, Penn and Wharton, or and Dartmouth and things like that, I felt like I was at a bit of a disadvantage. Just maybe some people were posturing a little bit. I can't really explain it, but I felt that it was an important piece of my development. It was also something I controlled. I'll go get one, right? So I went and started an executive program in January of 16, finished it in May in 17, and it was really, to a degree, to kind of put me on firmer footing in external relationships, because it did matter. It's not everything, but it is part of kind of the dance, if you will. Kind of going back to your point about the academic probation and all that, right? I mean, I just was not a disciplined student. I got to college at 17. I needed the military. It took me a few years there of not applying myself and not capitalizing on some wonderful opportunities. And I kind of went to I found myself working at a sandwich shop back in Dallas, Texas. And I was like, man, I'm going to wake up and be 50, right? And I just said, I'm going to do something different. Joined the military. I came in what's called open general. I mean, I didn't have a career field, and I wound up being a cop, which was kind of interesting because that's not really something I set out to do. But the military gave me structure, and it gave me a lot of things that helped me out. So that was a real turnaround point. So going back to get my MBA was really a big deal for me personally. And the reasons I'm bringing up first is, and it's core to the foundation too, is lifelong learning. I went back to college when I had a high school sophomore, and my son was a freshman or sophomore in college. And I wanted them to see me going back to school. It's something that you can do in your mid-40s, 50s, 60s. So I wanted to demonstrate being a lifelong learner. And the second part, to your point, was really unfinished business. I literally changed my major to avoid accounting. I remember talking to the counselor, and she was like, what are you interested in? I'm like, not taking accounting. Well, what do you want to do later? Not take statistics, right? So I think I landed on management or, poli-sci or something at the time. So for me, going back, I'm not the same guy I was at 17, and so it was a chance to kind of, take on something that before I was previously afraid of. And it was still hard, very difficult for me. I'm not a big math guy, but it was just a personal accomplishment that I wanted to log. It was also the first graduate degree in my family. So, for those kind of selfish reasons, that's why I went after it, but it has helped me a ton professionally.
I love that. I love that, facing the courage to face unfinished business, and I love the thought of doing that example for your kids. What was your thoughts on financing? How did you go about that?
Yeah, thoughts or not, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so we were kind of talking about this, right? I was eligible for the post 911 GI Bill, but you, as a military member, you have the opportunity to transfer it to family members. So I actually transferred it to. I had a son who was. I transferred it probably like I think at year 15 or so, and so it basically gave an education allowance to my wife, who was able to complete her 4-year degree. I dragged my wife all across the planet. We got married at the tail end of my first assignment. So our entire married life, we were in the military up through 14. I mean, I've seen her stock shelves at the BX and commissary, and sacrifice so much for our family. So I made the decision to transfer the GI Bill for her. Now that we had some stability, she immediately went back to college in Colorado, and once we got retired, and was able to finish her 4-year degree. So the education allowance is really for her or my kids at this point. So I no longer had it. So always an interesting drill to take a $100,000 loan at 46 years old, but it was more important than the money for some personal reasons, for some family reasons. I don't regret it one bit. I've got that little payment hitting me now, but we'll take care of it. But it's a necessary evil for some things that I both wanted and needed to accomplish personally.
I'm like you, a big advocate of lifelong learning, and I'm also a big advocate of investing in yourself. And I think for me, I'm pretty frugal, and so I can get hung up on scrimping. And when it comes to training or education or things like that, for me at least, that's one of those areas where it's like it's worth it. It plays dividends in the long run. It hurts in the short term, or maybe even medium term, but the impact of that is lifelong as an experience, but as well as what doors it opens up. Um,
Absolutely.
one thing I was curious about, in your work with the Pat Tillman Foundation, you've had exposure to so many different members of the veteran community. What are some of the most pressing challenges that you see facing the veteran community today?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? The demographic that we deal with at the Tillman Foundation are really high achievers, right? Certainly, you're encountering some difficulty, but really high achievers and have a really clear sense of what they want to go do. That's why they're pursuing the scholarship, right? And so they're kind of in the community. So friends I know that are separated, and other veterans that I've come across in the just in my duties, is I'm picking up on just this tremendous angst about separation. And that could be for a number of reasons, right? There could be some mental health issues. There could be there could be kind of visible, invisible scar issues. But there's kind of this larger issue of just transition stress in general, which is not just isolated to the military, but it is a big, big transition, right? Kind of going back to my point about making it a process and not an event. So I tend to see a lot of veterans who just seem kind of lost in their initial separation. They take a job they don't want, or they're just trying to figure out a way to kind of keep the money going while they kind of, like a bridge job to what they eventually really want to do. And it's a tough time. I mean, you're making some pretty major decisions. So, I think that for military veterans, it's really critical to be mindful of like what purpose and meaning is to you. And it could be anything, right? It could be driving a rig. It could be being a landscaper. It could be being a college professor. Nothing's off the table, right? It's about what's purposeful and meaningful to you. And so I think the challenge I see most often is veterans that don't have a sense of what that is, have not taken the time to figure out what that is, and they're suddenly not doing it. So you kind of lose all that camaraderie. You lose the teamwork. You lose the structure around your life. And then you suddenly, you're on the team, but you can't go in the locker room anymore, right? In the military. But then on the civilian side, you're engaged in work that's not meaningful to you. And that's a really difficult time. One of the things I heard a lot from that NBA panel was that people were using, very astutely, I think, using school as kind of that buffer, right? So they're getting out, they're executing on their GI Bill, they're taking it was a younger demographic there, right? But most of those guys and gals were kind of going into like 2-year butts and seats MBA programs, which I think is a really great place, kind of to our earlier point, to kind of stop and look up. So you're kind of working towards this business degree. And you can imagine you could do it with any degree plan, but and you're kind of surveying the land, getting your feet under you from just what's different, right? And there is so much that's different out here, but it is very learnable. So to answer your question, I think the biggest issue I'm seeing is this transition stress of, lacking meaning, which is like, like that's dangerous, right? Like that's a very difficult place to be. So if you start sprinkling in some of these other challenges the veterans face, then there could be some real distress there. So, but I think a lot of it is very much connected to transition stress, and it's just suddenly on you. It happens, and you're out, right? So, and I'd like to just offer kind of a solution to that, or a proposed solution to it, is making inroads with people that have already separated to kind of be that counsel to you. I talk to people all the time that are nearing retirement. They go, "Man, you seem like you're doing all right. Like, what do I do?" And had some really helpful conversations. So, trying to build your network of people that are separating or have separated to kind of help you figure. And I think that's what we were talking about. Sometimes you lay the grass and figure out where the sidewalks go later. Is get that whole body of information out there. Start asking questions of people that have already navigated the transition, and then the path will kind of emerge for you. And school might be a really good place to do that if that's an option to folks.
I love that focus on purpose and meaning. I think that in the 180 veterans I've interviewed, consistently there's that theme of, and I'll even say from my own experience, and my own experience being someone who was on submarines, but on the civilian side of submarines, of just kind of like in the military, but I wasn't GI Joe. It didn't feel like a huge piece of my identity. And even for me, when I got out, in retrospect, years later, it's like, wow, that was actually a big part of who I was. Even though I didn't think that was a big part of who I was, that is a big component of my values. And that military service, fulfilled a huge part of meaning. That was my mission. That was my purpose. That was a sense of a reason for being alive. And so it's been interesting to hear in so many of these interviews that to go from that and then to go to a wide open landscape of anything is possible, there can be a void. I think for most of us, a void of what is my purpose, what is my meaning, what is my calling. And so I love that thought of bridging that gap by talking to other people. It's certainly one of the intentions of this show, is to give different, to simulate that coffee chat, but to do that also on your own and to find people and learn from them what they're doing, how they got there, and how they transition that. And I wanted to dig in just a little bit deeper. I know we only have a couple minutes left, but you talked about that grass and sidewalk, and one of the things I most appreciated about your candor on the panel was this thought of there are life circumstances. You can have a vision of where you want to go. And I'm 38 now. I'm seeing this more and more. I'm seeing this as friends are dropping out of the workforce because they have a child with special needs. I have friends who are dropping out of the workforce or changing where they live because they have a parent with needs. And, for myself, Naval Academy, submarine, Stanford Business School, starting a company, and honestly, being a child of the baby boomer generation who it was all about me. My parents were all about me. I've had a life completely about me, doing whatever I want to do. And the very real truth that I'm seeing, and I'm at least hearing in your statement, is, you may have plans of where you want to live and what career you want to have. You never know what life is going to hand you and how you have to adapt. And so I'd love to just give you room to expand on that. Any thoughts you have on that grass and sidewalk, or just kind of life circumstances?
Yeah. So to your point, right? Very, very similar experiences, right? Like, you don't really realize how much the military is part of you, right? When you're kind of amidst it. And so I think that delta that emerges of like purpose and meaning when you get out is something really worthy of paying attention to. And I think you're doing really, really noble work, like with this podcast. It feels to me like you're trying to kind of close that awareness gap, right?
Yep.
And help people find more meaning. And I quoted, a guy, David Lee, a Stanford Business School guy, who works with Service to School, who's a remarkable individual who I was talking to him about my MBA application. He was helping me out with Service to School, and he made the comment that you have to view your best years of service as still ahead of you. And it's one of like the most compelling things anyone's ever said to me, right? And so I would challenge anyone listening to this podcast to, like, you have to view your life like that. In that it's a remarkable time in the military, and you get out, and that's okay. And you have to find new purpose and meaning. And there is a lot left. I mean, the military, I feel like the military was an early chapter. And there's going to be more chapters written. But to your point, then life starts happening, right? Like, I'm 46. My mom's 76. I have a stepfather who has some medical challenges. So there's a side of me that, you want to be real practical, and you want to plan, you want to get a degree, and you want to be in this focus area. But then things creep in, right? I mean, people, sometimes they start their families, and kids need to go to a high school, and there's not a good high school in your city or in your part of town. So you have to move. So what I'm getting a better appreciation of, and we talked a little bit about in the panel, is, man, there's kind of some stuff that's been happening even recently that I never saw coming. I'm going to live in Colorado eventually because of my parents. That was never really part of the calculus. Yeah, I'm headed to hang out, be bothering you all the time, man. I never really saw that coming. We thought we'd get out of the military and put some roots down, and then some challenges my parents face have become more apparent. So, who knows, right? Where our kids live might affect where we want to live and how we can come visit eventual grandkids. Not yet, don't want them yet, but, eventually there'll be some grandkids. Personal health issues, things impacting your career. There could be, we've had financial challenges. The country's had financial challenges. So if you're in financial service industry, the whole landscape could change. So there's a degree of just kind of work towards what you're working towards, find your purpose and meaning, but there's going to be some curveballs along the way, just like there were in the military, just like there are out here. Kind of embrace that, but don't think. I kind of thought I was getting out of the military, and it was like, bam, we're in Chicago. This is it. We're going to shut it down. We're living here. And even within 3 to 4 years, I'm already feeling tugs from other aspects of my personal life. It may affect where I work, where I live, and things like that. And you just need to be, I guess I can just say, you have to be comfortable with it.
I love it. Yep.
So
this is great. Well, I know we're at the end of our time, and I could honestly ask you questions for another 3 hours, but in maybe closing, anything that we have not covered that you want to share with listeners?
We covered a lot, right? We unpacked a whole lot here. Again, to go back to David Lee's comment of the best years of service are still ahead of you. They are. I would hope that anybody's listening to this and the other podcasts. I think that comes out in a lot of the other podcasts. Like, you've stumbled across some really impactful veterans that have found some real purpose and meaning, that had some challenges, that have found meaning. So it's a big transition, but it's doable, right? Asking for help is a sign of strength. Reach out to your network on the outside. Justin, look, I mean, like, you're a friend. I mean, I'll seek advice from you, but we have that same camaraderie that exists within the military is out here. It's just kind of crafted in a new way. So I would love to be able to kind of reduce some of the anxiety around separation for folks, but if they're hearing this, and that there is this whole other world out here, and it's just fine, and it's great. It'll welcome you. You've got to do some work on your side, and the civilians have some work on their own side. But some of this military-civilian divide it doesn't check out to me. Right? Is that I think military veterans are an asset, but you don't need to come out and identify as a military veteran. I see people hanging on to rank and reflecting, like, make the transition, get them to this side of the house, and then make it happen, just like you did in the service. And there's nothing really cosmic about that. It's doable. And so with support of friends and folks like you, I think it's entirely doable. And certainly open invitation to anybody listening to this podcast. Justin, feel free to connect us if I can be helpful in any way. I'm part of that team on the outside that's here to help you.
All right. Well, thank you for listening and or watching. If you like the video component, let me know. It does take a little bit more time to edit these. I'm willing to do that if it's beneficial to the community, but otherwise I'll stick to the podcast only format. So I've got my notes here. Because it was by video, I wasn't able to type my notes like I normally do, so I have to interpret my hastily scribbled, excited script to kind of, debrief what Kill shared. I love that quote from David Lee, who you'll find David's interview in the early days of Beyond the Uniform. If you search the site, you'll also find him in the MBA panel in episode number 181. But I love that quote, the best years of service are ahead of you. I think that's a great mindset to adopt as you transition, or have you as you have transitioned to your civilian career. Um, where Men Win Glory, for those of you who have not read the book, I loved it. One of the things that, just one of these random memories that stands out from that book is how in the off season, a lot of the football players would just kind of take the time and relax, and Pat used the time to train for marathons. And I just thought that was such a story of just going beyond, just kind of operating at the highest physical level and then just continuing to push it further. But check that out. If you go to beyondtheuniform.io, in the show notes, you'll find a little link to Audible. And Audible gives listeners of Beyond the Uniform a free audiobook of your choice. If you haven't used Audible before, use that link. I highly recommend using the free credit to get this book. Beyond the Uniform gets $15 every time you do it. It's a win-win situation. You don't have to pay. If you don't want to continue your Audible subscription, just make sure you make a note in your calendar to cancel it so it doesn't auto-renew on you. But check out that book. I love the. I'm trying to read this now. Oh, I like how he said in hiring, knowing your blind spots. And this is something I think about a lot too, because I know I still have blind spots. And it's kind of like anytime and I just went through this if you listen to one of my recent episodes in finding my role as Chief Revenue Officer at Schatzer about 3 months ago. There's always blind spots. There's always things that I don't realize about myself, about my strengths and weaknesses, about where I want to go in my career. And so I like that thought of using a third party to bounce ideas off of, as well as using a coach. And that's why we added the coaching component to Beyond the Uniform. I really like that thought too of that this whole transition is a process. It's not a single event. You don't transition out of the military on your last day. It's a process leading up to that. And I liked Kill's own story of exposing himself to new things, to new geographies, to new functional areas. And he seems like someone who's pretty set on going into the law enforcement industry, which makes sense. It's a direct extension of what he did in the military. But I love that because he gave himself that time and that room to explore, he found something that sounds like an even better fit for this next chapter in his career. It was great hearing about that flexibility of schedule. If that's something that appeals to you, you may want to prioritize that. Honestly, earlier in my career, I got out of the military, I guess, when I was 27. I got out of Stanford Business School when I was 29. At that phase in my life, I don't think I really cared about flexibility. When I got the job offer for McKinsey, one of the things for consulting, one of the things I said to him is like, look, I'm used to being underwater. I'm used to being away from my family for months at a time. So if you put me in a hotel and I've got cell phone service, I'm fine. I'll go anywhere in the world. And it was true at the time. And I loved working from 7 a.m. till 1 a.m. Like, it was exhilarating. I learned so much. So at that point in my life, flexibility didn't matter. At this point in my life, I'm 38 now. I've got a wife. I'm hoping to have kids soon. And that flexibility matters a lot more. I like being able to go for a bike ride in the morning. I like being able to take a day off to go hiking and camping. And those things have become more important. And so going back to that blind spot idea, it's just uncovering different aspects of ourselves as we change over time. It's not a one-time discovery and you're done. We're constantly changing as people. And the other thing that I love from this interview is Kill just talking about how your life circumstances change, and that can change what you want and what you prioritize. But if you are looking for that flexibility, it might be something to look at in the nonprofit industry. I imagine there's a little bit more flexibility there than in a lot of corporate jobs. It was really interesting hearing his thought on the school names and credibility, and I love the way he put it. I don't think I can rephrase it as eloquently, but I just love this sense of him realizing that the military, and I would agree, tends to hold up. He said the degree milestone as the thing to achieve, rather than the school or the credibility or the network. And I think those things do matter. So I would talk to people and see if that fits what you're looking for. And, maybe it's worth getting a degree online while in the military. I think that works great for a lot of people. For others, it may make sense to wait until you're out and you can go and get a degree from somewhere completely different. And I also like that thought of the unfinished business of him going back to school to almost prove something to himself. The thoughts on purpose were great. I really respect Kill for just kind of laying out there that sense of purpose. It really has come through in the 180 plus interviews I've done, and how important it is to have a mission, a purpose, and in a few cases, a calling. And I think Kill might be in that situation where he's found that calling. And so finding a way to bridge that gap. And there was one other one. Well, I am blanking on that, so I won't keep you waiting anymore. But if you enjoyed this interview, let me know. If I think Kill is just a very special human being. I think he's a kindred spirit, and really enjoyed his story. And I hope I took the interview the right way. I was really torn about how much to focus on the Tillman Foundation versus Kill's personal journey, and both could fill a couple novels. And so let me know if you want to hear more in this direction. Happy to reach back out. Happy to talk to someone else at the Pat Tillman Foundation. But hope you enjoyed this. Lots of great interviews coming out. I've got I think the next 2 months booked up. Really excited about what's coming. A lot of variety. And so keep the feedback coming. Keep the iTunes reviews coming. And thank you so much. See you or talk to you soon. Take care.